The first photo just gives you the characteristics for a parabola, and a parabola is just this U-shaped curve. It actually has a name. Okay, so we call this a parabola. And we're going to go over how do you find the axis of symmetry. Okay, symmetry means like how you cut the parabola, right in half. What is that equation that goes and cuts the parabola in half? The vertex is this point right here where it dips. Okay, and of course, if it's going the opposite way, what the top point would be. So that's called your vertex. And then we're going to talk about the y-intercepts and the x-intercepts. Okay. All right, so let's start with the first one. All right, so the very first thing, it says axis of symmetry. And right here, you already, it already says x equals to 3. So we're going to be going over how do you get this equation right here. And basically, it's the vertical line that divides that parabola into two mirror shapes. That means that both sides will look exactly alike. Okay, it just cuts the parabola right in half. So we're going to figure out how do you get this equation for this vertical line. And as you know, vertical lines always start with x equals, not y equals. Okay, x equals a constant is the equation for a vertical line. Now, I want you to write down this equation right here, because this is how we're going to get that equation, which we call the axis of symmetry. Okay, it says x equals, and then you see like a negative sign, b divided by a. At this point, we know what a, b, and c represent in our quadratic equation. So quadratic equations, guys, start with x squared. So you see right here where it says x squared minus 6x plus 5. So if you were to actually put this into your y equals key, this is what you would have. This is the graph of this parabola. And again, you can tell it's a quadratic equation because it starts with a squared term. And as before, this is your A term, this is your B term, this is your C term. So down here, it says take the B term, which is right here, and multiply it by a negative. Okay, that's what this is saying. Take the B term, multiply it by negative. So you can see how they put the B term in parentheses, multiplied it by negative, which makes it a positive. And then over the A term. Okay, and it's actually opposite of b over 2a, and that should be a 2. Okay, so you're going to multiply the 2 times the a term. The a term is right here. The coefficient is 1. Okay, so that's where this 1 comes from. The 2 comes basically from the formula. Okay, they just have left that off. So just make sure you have it written as the negative b. And I always tell students, instead of saying negative b, say it as the opposite sign of b. Because really, when you multiply it by a negative, it just changes it to the opposite sign, right? Okay. Now, the form that we're going to be using, and this is like a lot of vocabulary, but you got to understand, form that we're going to be using is called standard form. Okay, standard form means your squared term is first, your b term is next, your constant is last. This is called vertex form. Okay, that's a different form, but we're going to be using standard form. Okay. All right, so, and this is just identifying the parts right now. So you might want to just make sure you have like these little titles. Obviously, the y-intercept is where it crosses the y-axis. That's pretty self-explanatory. Okay, this is your vertex right here, right where it dips. And if it was going the other way, downward, then it would, of course, be at the top. Okay, so you want to make sure you have that labeled as the vertex, and go ahead and put what the point is, positive 3, negative 4. Here's the axis of symmetry. That's the line that cuts it, so it'll be symmetric on both sides, and that is x equals to 3, which is what we got from the previous slide. Okay, so just make sure you have those labels. and make sure that, you know, you did say that the y-intercept was 5. And let's go ahead and write the x-intercept as well. Well, actually, that'll be on the next slide. So we're just talking about the y. Let's just leave that here. Okay, because that'll be on the next one. All right, so x-intercepts. Now, this is where we have a lot of different names for x-intercepts. So if you put this acronym, it'll probably help you remember. X-intercepts are called roots. They're called zeros, so we put a 0. X-intercepts and solutions, rocks. Okay, roots, please write them all down. Zeros, x-intercepts, and solutions. Y-intercept only has one name. It's called the y-intercept. Okay, x-intercept has many names. So please make sure you write all of these down. So technically, I could ask you on an assessment, or you could be asked later on your standardized test, like, what are the roots to the quadratic equation? You have to know roots are x-intercepts. Like, it's simply asking, where is this parabola crossing the x-axis? And they could ask it all different ways. Technically 5, they could actually use the word x-intercept, use the word roots, zeros, solutions. Well, actually that's still 4. Okay. And of course, quadratics are functions. Okay. If they go up or down. Okay. Make sure I put that in there. They have to be going up or down to be a function. Okay. So now we're adding the x-intercept. So this is a slide which shows you where the x-intercepts are. Okay, at 1 and 5. And this is how you write it. The x-intercepts are basically just in these little set brackets. Don't use parentheses, because parentheses then would represent a coordinate. Okay, so just simply write them, you know, both where it crosses the x-axis at 1 and 5. 1 and 5. So this is just being able to identify the parts. In a few minutes, we're going to get to how you actually do all of this stuff mathematically and using your graphing calculator, of course. All right, so now we're going to get to part 2. Okay, guys, so this is part 2 on graphing quadratics in standard form. Okay, so it's just a simple fold down to the little dashed line. All right, so let's get into graphing. Of course, have your graphing calculators handy as we do this as well. Okay. All right, so here we are in standard form. Now, when it's just the a term by itself, we call that the parent function. And we're going to simply, you know, hit your y equals key, put in x squared, and then you could go to the table and get these points right here. So we're just going to be graphing. So I would like for you to go ahead and hit your y equals key, put in just x squared into the y sub 1, hit graph. Okay. And your graph should look very similar to this. All right. And that's what we call the parent function. So sometimes you'll be asked to compare something to the parent function. Okay. All right. Okay, so now you can get this stuff again, all these numbers right from your graphing calculator. Now it is standard to, if you were to graph on your own, so try to pick some values that are negative and try to always use 0, and then try to use some positive numbers. So these are like our standard numbers that we use. You want some negative numbers, positive numbers, and 0. Okay, so you can fill in your table. Okay. All right, so obviously a parabola is the U-shaped curve. Okay, that's the U shape that you will get. The axis of symmetry, you can kind of look at the graph and tell that this one cuts in half where the vertex is right here. So we can tell that's going to be x equals to 0. Okay. And again, it's just explaining the definition of it. The vertical line that divides the parabola in half. And then you can actually read the coordinate if you had to. Okay, let me move this. Okay, so this one obviously is at 0, 0. But we do have some other two names that we're going to add to the vertex. So when the parabola is going upward like it is, this is called the lowest point of your parabola, and we call that a minimum point. And if the parabola was going in the opposite direction, that means like this way, now your vertex is up here. So that's the highest point, and that will be called your maximum point. So you might want to add that picture to your foldable. Okay. I can't put the entire word, but you can write it completely out. I'll put it under here. That would be the maximum point when it's at the top. When it's at the bottom, when the vertex is at the bottom, it's called the minimum point. Okay. All right. So, I mean, it makes sense. If it's dipping this way, then that's the lowest point of the parabola. Okay. If it's going downward, then that's the highest point. So that would be called your maximum point. Okay. That just makes sense. All right. So this is what we're going to do. It says graph each function below. So put this into your calculator, hit your y equals key. And notice how we picked values that are negative, 0, and some positive ones. So -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. Those, again, are standard numbers when you're graphing. All right, so -2, -1, 0, 1, 2. Once you have these written in your table, then, of course, you will graph it. Okay, go ahead and graph. So if this one is not on your foldable, just add it somewhere on the paper. Okay, hopefully you have like the back of your foldable you can put it on. Okay, just add x squared, y equals x squared plus 2. We might have to just add them in and then make the table. All right, so we'll add number 2 as well. So you're going to put y equals x squared minus 2. And then, of course, you know, you can graph it on your calculator, see what it looks like, and make a table. So you'll be doing this for homework. You'll be making tables like this, graphing it, and then I'm going to show you how you actually come up with the vertex points, because you'll have to find the axis of symmetry. Okay, so I'll walk you through that process. All right, so it looks like on your foldable you have questions 3 and 4. All right, so here's number 2. And then we'll do 3 and 4 together in a second. All right. All right, so in question number 3, what we're doing here, it says solve. Solve means you are looking for the x-intercept. So you might want to remember that acronym that we started out with. So when you see solve or solution, that means you're looking for the x-intercepts. Okay. So the very first thing you have to do is put this in what we call standard form. So this is not in standard form yet, because it says equals to 4x, and you have to have it equal to 0. So that means we just subtract the 4x and put it in the middle, because it has to be in the form of a, b, and c. Okay, so just move the 4x over by subtracting it over. You always use the opposite sign, and now it's set equal to 0. So now we're looking for the x-intercept. So what you're going to do is you can graph that. So go ahead and put that into your calculator, x squared minus 4x plus 7. Okay. And once you graph it, you should get a nice picture of what it looks like. Okay, and notice it's not even touching the x-axis. So if it doesn't touch the x-axis, you simply write no solution. If it had touched the x-axis, because you know the x-axis is down here, then you would have written, you know, the actual points where it was touching the x-axis. If it doesn't, you simply write no solution, okay? Now, you can also look up here and tell what the vertex point is, okay, on your calculator. So it looks like you go over 2 and up 1, 2, 3. Okay, and there's your vertex point. So this is what I want you guys to do. In your table, you're going to have this vertex point right here. You should look for 2, 3. And then I want you to pick a couple of numbers above the vertex and a couple of numbers below the vertex. Now, they picked all positive numbers. Okay, we can go with that for right now. But like I said, it is nice to have a combination of numbers. But depending on where the vertex is, you might have all positive numbers. Okay, so find out where the vertex is, pick 2 points above it and 2 points below it, because that actually cuts your parabola right in half. Okay, now I'm going to show you how to find that vertex point by hand, because sometimes the vertex point might be in between two numbers. It might not always be a whole number or an integer. So this is what you're going to do. And put steps to find vertex. And this is doing it mathematically. Okay, so for your homework, you might have to do this if you cannot read the coordinates. So you're going to use x equals that opposite of b divided by 2a. Okay, so let's see what the original equation was. X squared minus 4x plus 7. Okay, please write this down, guys, because these, oh, is it frozen? My fault. Write this down, because this is going to be what you're going to have to use when you have to find the vertex by hand. Okay, x squared minus 4x plus 7, steps to find the vertex. Step 1 is right here. You're going to write that down. X equals the opposite of b over 2a. Now remember, this is also called your axis of symmetry. So I'm going to actually write that word as well. Write it down. So if I just simply asked you to find the axis of symmetry, you would stop at step 1. If I asked you to find the vertex, then you would continue after step 1, right? So what if I just said, just tell me what the axis of symmetry is? You would do step 1 and stop, right? So here we go. So x equals, okay, here's your b term. So this is saying take the b term and multiply it by negative. So it's going to make it what? Positive. Over 2 times the a term. Your a term is 1. So what is 4 divided by 2? 2. So if I simply asked you for that answer, you would stop right there and you would say the axis of symmetry is x equals to 2. That's what cuts the parabola right in half. Now, I'm asking you to also find the vertex. So now what you're going to do is simply use your calculator. So step 2, use calculator, type equation. So once you type your equation in, go to the table, look for the x value, and that means from step 1. And write down the y value. That's it. So I'm saying in your table, here's 2, and there's the y, 3, and there's your vertex. It's that simple. So that's how you would do it by hand. So you use your calculator, you type the equation in, you go to the table, look for the x value from step 1, and write down the y value. Okay. Now, let's say that the x value came out to be 1/2. You guys remember how to change the table? If it comes out to be a fraction, what do? You hit second what? I'm going to put up here, if x is a fraction. How do you change your table? Who remembers what to do? All right, so change your window to 0.5 or 1/2, and then give me what the y value is. Yes? 5 1/4. And again, you would not be able to read that from your calculator. Okay, you wouldn't be able to read 5.25. But as long as you know what the x value is, your calculator, you can just change that x into the calculator and it'll tell you what the y value is. Okay, so it's okay if your axis of symmetry actually comes out to be a fraction. Now, what I want you to notice is that your axis of symmetry is always your x coordinate to your vertex. So this x equals 2 is the same 2 that's right here. Okay, so that axis of symmetry will also be your x coordinate to your vertex. All right, let's do the next one. Well, this is just the process you would take. Solve by graphing. You must have it in this form first. Okay, that's what we just did. And then we found the axis of symmetry. Okay, that was the step that we just did. Okay, I kind of shortened these for you. We put it into the calculator, we went to the table, we found the vertex, and then, of course, if you were to graph it, you could just pick some points from the table. Okay, and this one did not have any x-intercepts. All right, now go to your packets. Okay, so I'll be doing question number 1. So for your homework, you have pages 1 through 3. So I'm going to do the very first question with you. Now, some of these graphs, you know, the lines did not come out that well. Maybe I'll do number 2 since I can actually see the lines. So if you wanted to use your own graph paper or make some additional lines so it'll look like a grid, feel free to do that. Okay. All right, so let me do number 2. First thing it says, sketch the graph of each function. Very easy. So that means with your calculator. So what you're going to do, and I'm going to put calculator for number 1. You're going to type this into your calculator. Okay, everybody type it in. And then we're going to put a t-table off to the side. Okay, so just make a t, put x and y, and then type that in. I'm going to ask you for some points. You'll tell me the points to put into the table, and then we'll graph it. Let's do -2. And we might not be able to get them all up here, so I'll see what fits. But again, these are our standard numbers. So -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. All right, so once you have your table filled in and you see that some numbers come out large, then we just don't graph that. Okay, you can still have it in your table. We're just not going to be plotting that particular point. So the first one says -1, 6. So I'm going to go to -1 right here. And then I'm going to go up to 6. Okay, then 0, 0. Okay, then +1, -2. Okay. And then 2, 0. All right, so let's, what does 3 come out to be? All right, so let's add that. So I'll have a point up here. All right. And let's go ahead and make the parabola. Make sure you have arrows on both ends, right? So I've taken care of number 1, which is just to sketch it. Now it says write the equation for the axis of symmetry. So that's going to be part B. All right, so for B, I'm going to be using x equals the opposite of B divided by 2a. Okay, that's how we find the axis of symmetry. So what is my opposite side of the B term? What's my opposite sign of the b term? Positive 4. And if you want to put it as a negative and then put the negative 4 in parentheses, it's the same thing, but I always just say the opposite side of b, so I don't have to write all those negatives in. Okay, divided by 2 times my a term. My a term is what? 2. So what is 4 divided by 4? 1. There's my, I've just done number part B. X equals to 1. That is your axis of symmetry. Okay. And again, none of this is difficult. It's just knowing what it's asking you to do. All right. So we just did, this is part B right here. You start off with X equals opposite of B over 2A, put in your numbers, simplify your fraction. Next, it says to write the vertex. So remember in our foldable, I said step 1 to the vertex is to find the axis of symmetry. So this is part C. I'm going to go to the calculator, go to the table, and look where X equals 1, which is right here. Okay, so 1 pairs up with what? Negative 2. There's my vertex right there. Okay, so that's part C. Part D says identify solutions, which are x-intercepts. Well, you can tell where it's crossing the x-axis. So x-intercepts, that's part D. And what are they? 0 and 2. That's it. That's all you do. Okay. And if you didn't have any, if they were graphed up here and they're not touching the x-axis, what would you write? No solution, correct. So that's all you're doing for each one of the ones on this page here. Okay. Like I said, it's not difficult. It's just knowing what they're asking you to do. Most of it, your calculator is helping you out. All right. When you go to the next page, 5 and 6, same questions. Okay, then of course they're just asking you some questions about some data, and then you'll get to some reviewing, back to SOL review. Okay, on the 3rd page.